Alright, so here I want to run through making another kind of version of a simple dialogue system. So again, this will be a simple walk up to an NPC, press our interact button, and kind of flip through a series of lines of dialogue. The difference here is we're going to utilize what's called data tables, which is think like a super array that will allow us to link things like portrait icons and names to each line of dialogue rather than just the dialogue. So we're going to create a data table, fill it with information, and then utilize that within a widget to make our conversations a little more interesting. So we're going to start off the same way we usually do with an actor blueprint. This will be our NPC, BP, NPC, test. Let's test, open it up, and in here we're just going to add a couple components to get us started. First thing, let's grab a collision. Just grab a sphere collision, add that to the scene, and then let's also add a static mesh. And let's see if we can grab our... we'll just just make this easy, add a good old cube for reference. And then of course go ahead and scale up your collision so we can properly get to it. And remember, you can drag it into the scene just to make sure it's big enough. So we got that. Next thing, we're going to utilize our same good old interaction blueprint interface. So let's go ahead and add that to our blueprint. So we'll go up to class settings, implement interfaces, and then we'll grab our BPI interact. So again, we can use our classic interact button to do whatever it is we need to do. And then last thing we need to begin is we just need to add a quick variable. This will be our talking question mark, just to track if we are currently talking or not. Cool. So event graph, we'll come back here in a minute. We got our interface, we got our things, we should be good to go. Compile, save. Now let's go back here. Next thing, let's go ahead and add let's make our data table. So data tables are a new thing, but all a data table is think like a big Excel spreadsheet. There's rows and columns. Each column represents a different variable, and then you can have a row with a number of different variables that you can just change and control. So there's kind of two parts to a data table: the structure and the data table itself. So the structure is the first thing we make, and all that is just a list of variables that will be included in the data table. So let's go ahead and right click, and let's go to, we can actually just search up structure, and here it is, and call this your, we'll usually put struct underscore NPC data table, NPC data, something like that. Or let's call it NPC dialogue. If we open that up, we got a new blueprint type thing, and here's what we got. So all this is going to list out different variables. So we can name the variable and we can set what type it is. So we will think about this like for every line of dialogue, what is all the information we need? And for this example, we need 3 pieces of information. First one we need is the current dialogue, and the current dialogue is going to be a string. It's just going to be some text. And let's hit this plus icon to add another variable. Next thing we're going to need is the speaker's name, which will also be a string. Then we'll add one more, and this will be the portrait. And then instead of a string, we're going to search up 2D texture, and then go down to this texture 2D, and then grab an object reference. So this will basically allow us to input like a PNG image. So we'll save this, and there we go. So all we have is a list of different types of information. Our current dialogue, which is a string, our speaker's name, which is a string, and then our portrait, which is a 2D texture. So now that that's created, we can go ahead and create our data table. So let's right click. Let's create again, we'll just search it up, a data table. Here it is. Data table. And when we create it, it's going to ask us to pick a structure to define it. And if we go in here, we can find our struct NPC dialog that we just created. And when we press OK, it'll make our data table. So we can call it like, let it save, let it save. We can tell it something like DT dialog. Let's open that up and see what that looks like. So again, a data table is a new kind of asset for us. And again, just think of it like an Excel spreadsheet. So right now it's linked up to our struct we created, which just defines the different columns. You can see all of our columns here. We got our current dialogue, our speaker's name, and the portrait. So if we press this add button, it's going to create a new row. We can name this row something like line 1, and then we can define, it doesn't like spaces, so we'll call it line 1, no spaces, and it will now let us define everything about that row. So for line 1, let's say it's a conversation between a boss and an employee. So boss is going to have the first line. He's going to say, hey, what are you doing? And in the speaker's name, this is the boss. And let's find an image. I think I got some good old fish PNGs. So, line 1 is he's saying, hey, what are you doing? The name is the boss, and the portrait is the fish. So the portrait can be whatever. And now let's make a quick back and forth conversation. So we'll hit our next plus. This will be line 2. The dialogue will be, I don't know, not much. Speaker's name, this will be employee. And we will again, let's grab a different fish. It'll be fish PNG 1. Oh, that one was fish PNG 1. It'll be fish 3. And then we can just go back and forth. So I'm going to create 2 more. This will be line 3. Again, it doesn't like spaces. Line 3. It's going to say, do better. And his name is boss. And he is fish PNG 1. And then last one, line 4. He's going to say, you're not the boss of me. And this is the employee. He is fish 3. Alright, so we got a little conversation going on here. But so previously we kind of did all of this within a single array, and that array just had the dialogue. But by making a data table, we can apply more information. We can utilize more. So we can now define the dialogue, what the portrait is, and what the speaker's name is. So, this is where you'll basically build your conversation. So let's save this, and let's go to the next thing. So now that we have our information, we need to create our widget that will pull all that information in and create, put it into the widget. So let's go ahead and create a new little UI element. So we'll right click in our folder here. We'll go down to user interface, create a new widget blueprint, a user widget. This will be our UI widget or UI data table dialog. Call it whatever makes sense. I got a lot of stuff in this project, so Gotta think of creative names. But we'll open up this widget and let's go ahead and build it out quick. So, it's nothing new in terms of like what we're adding. So I'm gonna start with a canvas panel, drag and drop that on. And then next thing I need, so for each of those pieces of information in our data table, we need a component in our widget to like populate it with. So for example, we're going to have our, let's start with the image. We drag an image on, I'm going to put it up here. We can go ahead, if we go to the brush on the right hand side, we can set like a default placeholder, which is always nice to do. So if I go fish, grab fish 2 as the placeholder, this will also just help us get our size down. Then let's go to our anchors, Control Shift click on one of them to center it. So I like to anchor it to the bottom middle, and I can reposition my fish to like here. So that's where my icon will pop up. And then go ahead and rename the component in the hierarchy here as well, just so we know what's what. This will be the portrait. Next, let's add some text to the canvas panel, select it, set the anchor, set some default text. I always like to kind of say what it is. So this is the current dialogue. And we can click and drag the dialogue up, place it in position, and maybe give the box a little more space. So we got our current dialogue there. And then finally, or let's go ahead and rename this text block to current dialogue. And then the last thing we need is our name thing. So let's grab one more text, add it to the canvas panel, anchor it to the bottom center, Control Shift click, drag the text up, let's just drag it above our fish here, and call this name. Position that, and then we're good to go. So as we populate this information, this is kind of the format it'll be in. So obviously you can take your time and do as much or as little with this as you would like. Great. So now we got to hook these all up. Let's rename this text block as well to speaker's name. Great. And there we go. So let's go down our list. So if we select our portrait and we go over to the right to its details, we go down to the brush, we can see this image right here. We go up, we see this little link icon. If we press that, we can create a new binding. And what this will do is it's going to create a little function that will allow us to set what the input is. So we're going to create this one, and let's go back to the designer and create the next one. So we're just going to go down our list. We're now going to select our current dialogue. We're going to go to the text input, and we can see that link icon again. We're going to press it. We're going to create a binding. This will now be get current dialogue. And then we'll do the last thing as well for the name. Create binding, get name. Great. So now we have one function for each of our little inputs. And now they're just looking for something. So we got to give them a value. So the next thing we got to do is we're going to pull the information from our data table. And that will then be kind of populated in here. So to get that started, let's go to our event graph. So how we're going to do this is first thing's going to be off of this event construct here. So first thing we'll need is we need a reference to our data table. So if we drag out from here, we can actually, first thing, let's go to our variables list. Let's hit the plus icon, and let's call this dialog data table. So we need a couple kind of things here. And then for the variable type, we can search up data table, and that will be a type we can get an object reference to. And then we're going to drag the data table in. Going to get the data table. Let's make sure we compile, select the data table variable, come down here, and we'll be able to set it. We can set it to our DT dialog. So this is the data table we created earlier. And there we go. Okay, so that variable set up. So now we got a reference to the variable, and we can do a get data table row names. And so this is just going to take all of our rows in our data table and then put them in a list. And this will allow us to kind of have a number of them and kind of utilize an index to kind of flip through them. So if we now right click this out row names, we can promote it to a variable, and I'll just call this like lines, and that's all we need here. So event construct happens as soon as the widget's created. So when we create the widget, it's gonna give us a list of our lines. Next thing we're gonna do that's gonna kind of run it all is we're gonna make a custom event. This will just be talk. And one last thing we need before we can make this, let's go to our variables list, create a new variable. This will be our dialog index. So this determines what row are we pulling information from. And this will be an integer. Spell it right, index, compile, and there we go. Okay, so to make this all work, first thing we need is we're going to grab our lines variable. We're going to get the lines. Then we're going to get a copy. And then, so if we remember kind of how arrays work, so when we get a copy of it, it's basically going to output a piece of our array at a given index. So remember, each line of the array has a different number assigned to it, and the index is that, what line we're going to use. And so whatever row we end up using, we're going to pull the information from it. So if we just are connected to nothing, and then we search up get data table row, get data table row, should be at the bottom here, should look like this. We can then hit this little drop down. We can select our DT dialog as the source data table. And then for the row name, let's plug in our variable here. So now this node here is what is that link, allows us to access all of those different variables we set. So if we now take this out row, right click it, and split it, you can now see here's our current dialog, our speaker's name, and our portrait. So this will directly output all of the things we set and created within our data table. So now what we can do, so every time we talk, it's going to get all the information from a specified row of dialog based on this index. So as we progress this index, it's going to give us different information. So to hook it all up, if we just go through each of these little outputs here and right click them and promote them to a variable. Let's do this one by one. Promote to variable. Promote to variable. It'll give us 3 variables that we can then use to set our different widget components. So I'm going to take a sec, just clean it up a little bit. And there we go. So how that will look is, now we have 3 new variables. Here they are over here. If we go back to those 3 little functions we made earlier, that will set our information. This one's our portrait. Or let's do that one. So we got the current dialog. So let's grab that current dialog variable, plug it in. Let's go to the speaker's name, grab that variable, plug it in. And then finally for the get portrait, this one we got to do a little different. If we actually right click this and split it, it'll give you all the different inputs. So for that brush, there's like a bunch of different things you can plug into it, but we're specifically looking for this return value image. So if we now grab our portrait, we can get the portrait and we can plug that right in. So again, right click the return value and split it to get access to all these. Great. Let's compile. Let's save. Let's go back to our event graph. There we go. So every time we run the call, this call function, or this talk function, it's going to look at our list of lines pulled from our data table. It's going to look at our index to pick a line, and then it's going to pull all the information of that line and then set each of our widget components to be equal to those variables. So that should be all the functionality we need within the widget itself. The rest, to get it going, get it running, will be built in the NPC blueprint itself. So let's compile, let's save this. We can just close that out for now. And we can hop back in our NPC blueprint, where our cube and stuff is. So let's go to the event graph. This is mostly the same as when we built our initial one. So first thing we'll do, let's go ahead and right click and implement our interact event. And let's grab our talking variable and let's plug that into a branch. Great. So whenever we interact, we're going to, if we're already talking, we're going to continue talking. If we're not talking, we're going to add the widget to the screen and begin the whole talking situation, which will be good. Cool. So we got that, and we can do next one. So, all right. So if we're not talking, so out of the false, first thing we'll do is we will create widget. The widget we will create is our BPI or BPUI data table dialog, so whatever you named your widget. And we will then, if we right click the return value, we can get a reference to it. So we'll promote it to a variable. Just call this UI. And then we can add to viewport. So that'll pop the widget up on our screen. And then last, after we add it to the screen, we will now be talking. So we're going to set talking to true. So now we would go through the true. And then at that point, we'll start talking. So let's create another custom event. Custom event, this will be our talk. And we want to run the talk at the end of this. So after we set our talking variable, let's talk. Go. So this, again, is a reference to this custom event. So what does our talking event look like? So what our talking event does, all it needs to do is it needs to make a connection to our widget. And then in that widget, it needs to run the widget's talking event. So we're going to get the reference to the UI, and then we're going to talk. And again, this function is the one from our, go to it quick. That's a reference to this function here that we created earlier. So we got our talk. We will then talk in the data table. And if we remember, every time we talk, it's going to look at the current index, and that's the line of dialogue it's going to pull, which is directly related to these. So after we talk once, when we need to move the dialogue index up one. So let's get dialogue index, and then let's if we do plus plus, we can do the increment int, which will just add 1 to our dialogue index and reset it. So we should have this. So again, this is the custom event from the widget. Great. So We interact, add the widget to the viewport, turn on talking, begin our talking event. Now when we interact with it again, since we're already talking, it's going to put us through the true, in which case we just need to, again, just continue talking. So talk, which again is referencing this one here. Great. And that should progress it through the conversation. So let's compile, let's save, add to viewport, oh, I need to target, there we go, compile, better, save, let's see it in action. So right now, we walk up to our cube, we should be able to press E, boss, hey, how you doing? If we talk again, should progress it. Employee, not much. Do better, you're not my boss. Here we go. So now, last thing we could do is have a way to end the conversation, because you can see it just kind of stays up there forever. So an easy way to do that is if we just take our sphere here and do a on component end overlap. We can just remove from parent, or let's grab a reference to our widget and remove from parent, and then we'll set talking, turn it off again, and then we should be able to restart our conversation. So compile, save, let's have a look, play. We walk up, talk, E, press my interact button to progress, and when we're done, walk away, it will reset it. So this will like fully reset it, so if we go and talk again, it's going to restart the conversation. So keep that fact in mind, because if you want to be able to like save your kind of save your spot basically, that would mean you would just want to store this dialogue index somewhere else. So we could potentially store that on the player themselves or on the NPC themselves. So there's some option there, but that should get you this kind of interaction. You know, the main advantage here is we can connect additional information beyond just what the dialogue is to each line. So, you know, like we were able to do, we got the current dialogue, the speaker's name, and what portrait to display. And, you know, put that all together, you got yourself a little more immersive of a dialogue system.